In December 1944, the Ardennes forests lay blanketed under a thick layer of snow, transforming the European landscape into a frozen wasteland. A group of American soldiers, weary and shivering, trudged through this desolate terrain, their breath visible in the icy air. They had been stationed in the small Belgian town of Bastogne, unaware that the coming days would test the limits of human endurance and courage. These men were outnumbered, under-equipped, and surrounded by dense woods that offered little protection from the biting cold or the advancing enemy. The morale among the troops was fragile, yet there was a quiet determination in the air. The situation was dire. German forces, well-armed and experienced, were advancing with a sense of purpose that left little room for error. Reports indicated that the enemy expected a quick surrender, confident in their superiority of numbers and firepower. However, the American defenders were resolute. They knew that yielding Bastogne would not only compromise the Allied front, but also embolden the enemy to push deeper into Western Europe. Before the United States had fully mobilized its industrial might for total war, soldiers relied heavily on supplies that were often insufficient for winter combat. Frostbite claimed more victims than gunfire in some sectors, and each day's survival was a struggle against both the elements and the enemy. These men endured freezing nights in trenches and makeshift foxholes, often without proper winter clothing or adequate food. The snow that covered the forest floor became both a cover and a curse, masking movements, but also exposing them to deadly artillery fire. Communications were unreliable and reinforcements were uncertain. Radio signals crackled intermittently, leaving commanders in a constant state of anxiety, unsure if help would arrive in time. Yet, despite these conditions, there was a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose that bound the soldiers together. Every decision, every patrol, and every defensive position was a calculated risk in a game of survival against overwhelming odds. The tension in the air was palpable. Rumors of German encirclement spread through the ranks, and each soldier understood the gravity of the moment. Bastogne was more than a town. It had become a symbol of defiance, a frozen fortress where courage would be measured not by victories in open battle, but by the ability to endure, resist, and hold the line. Around December 16, 1944, the German army launched what would become the largest offensive in the Western Front since D-Day. Adolf Hitler, desperate to split the Allied forces and force a negotiated peace, had meticulously planned an assault through the Ardennes, aiming to seize key towns and disrupt supply lines. The operation, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, relied on surprise, speed, and overwhelming force. American forces in the region were caught off guard, their defensive positions thinly spread across a cold, forested landscape. The German offensive involved more than 200,000 troops, supported by hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. The scale of the attack was unprecedented, and the tactical precision of the German commanders posed an immediate and terrifying threat to the Allies. Bastogne, with its strategic network of roads, became a primary target. Control of the town would allow the Germans to advance quickly toward Antwerp and sever the Allied supply chain. The American units stationed there were mostly inexperienced, recently arrived, and ill-prepared for the winter campaign. Intelligence reports underestimated the speed and ferocity of the German assault, and the defenders faced an enemy determined to exploit every weakness. Villages were quickly overrun, and the surrounding countryside fell into enemy hands. The snow, which had seemed like a protective blanket, now hindered mobility and complicated resupply efforts. Roads became treacherous, slowing reinforcements and making it difficult to evacuate the wounded. The German plan was bold but calculated. Panzer divisions led the spearhead, while infantry units secured the flanks and disrupted communications. Artillery barrages rained down on key positions, and Luftwaffe aircraft targeted supply convoys and defensive strongholds. The sheer volume of the offensive created chaos among the American ranks, forcing commanders to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. Local units were isolated, and the flow of supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements became uncertain. The psychological impact of facing such overwhelming numbers was significant, yet it also galvanized some of the defenders who realized that surrender was not an option. In the midst of this chaos, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe found himself thrust into a situation few could have anticipated. An artillery officer by training, rather than a frontline commander, McAuliffe assumed responsibility for the defense of Bastogne when senior leaders were incapacitated or out of contact. He arrived to find a town encircled by German forces, with American troops exhausted, freezing, and facing dwindling supplies. Morale was fragile, yet the necessity of strong leadership was immediate. McAuliffe understood that his decisions could mean the difference between holding the town or allowing it to fall. The responsibility weighed heavily, but he knew that hesitation could be fatal. The German command demanded surrender, sending a formal message to Bastogne's defenders that outlined the hopelessness of their situation. McAuliffe's response became legendary. With calm determination, he wrote a single word back, "Nuts." This brief reply conveyed both defiance and clarity, signaling to his soldiers that surrender was not an option. The courage of leadership is not always found in grand speeches or heroic charges. Sometimes it is found in a simple act of resolve that inspires confidence and fortifies the will of those under your command. McAuliffe understood that maintaining morale was as critical as tactical planning. Soldiers needed to know that their leaders believed in their capacity to endure, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Under his command, defensive positions were reorganized, artillery units were redirected to cover critical approaches, and supply shortages were managed with ingenuity. McAuliffe coordinated with local commanders, ensuring that communication lines remained open despite constant enemy pressure. Patrols scouted German movements, and counterattacks were carefully calculated to slow the encroaching forces. The winter weather, while punishing, was also leveraged to the defenders' advantage, as the Germans faced similar challenges with mobility and logistics. Every decision, every order, and every act of leadership became a lifeline for the soldiers fighting to hold Bastogne. By asserting authority and demonstrating resolve, McAuliffe transformed a situation of despair into one of determined resistance. The defenders of Bastogne drew strength from his example, understanding that courage under fire required more than weapons and strategy. It required trust, clarity, and unwavering commitment. His leadership in crisis would become a defining moment in the Battle of the Bulge, showing the world that even against superior forces and harsh conditions, steadfast command and human courage could defy expectations and alter the course of history. As the siege of Bastogne continued through December 1944, the conditions for the American defenders grew increasingly dire. Harsh winter weather, deep snow, and freezing temperatures combined with relentless German attacks to create a crucible of endurance. Supplies of food, ammunition, and medical aid were dangerously low, and casualties mounted with every passing day. Yet, the soldiers held their positions, digging trenches, reinforcing barricades, and coordinating artillery fire with remarkable precision. Each man understood the stakes. Surrendering Bastogne would open a path for the German advance, potentially splitting the Allied forces and altering the trajectory of the war in Europe. The Americans also leveraged the winter landscape, using snow-covered fields to conceal movements and establish ambushes. Communications with higher command remained sporadic, yet the resolve of the troops never wavered. Morale was bolstered not only by General McAuliffe's leadership, but by the shared sense of purpose among the soldiers, who knew that every hour they held the line brought the Allies closer to mounting a counteroffensive. As days turned into nights of continuous struggle, small but pivotal victories provided hope. Units repelled German advances, captured critical positions, and maintained control over key roadways essential for resupply. The symbolic refusal to surrender, epitomized by McAuliffe's response of "nuts," became a rallying point for the defenders and a source of frustration for the attackers. Allied forces, aware of the siege, worked tirelessly to break through the encirclement. Reinforcements eventually arrived, relieving some pressure on Bastogne and allowing the defenders to consolidate their positions. The town, though battered and scarred, remained firmly in American hands. The defense of Bastogne proved that resilience, leadership, and collective determination could defy seemingly insurmountable odds. The soldiers' ability to endure extreme cold, shortages, and continuous enemy fire slowed the German advance, disrupted their timetable, and contributed significantly to the ultimate failure of Hitler's offensive. Bastogne became a symbol of courage and determination under impossible circumstances, a historical testament to how ordinary men, led by steadfast leadership, could hold the line against overwhelming force and shape the course of World War II.